You are Locked On Auburn, your daily podcast on the Auburn Tigers. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Yes, welcome on into Locked On Auburn, your daily Auburn Tigers podcast. I'm your host, Zac Blackerby. And of course, if you are watching on YouTube, I'm going to ask you to go ahead and click that subscribe button. And if you're on a podcast, if you're listening on Apple Podcasts, please leave us a review. It would mean a ton. All right, so fun show today. In a few minutes, we're going to be joined by Darrell Dapprich. He is one of the hosts of the Max Roundtable up in Montgomery, but also he is a big part of the Hornets Sports Network, very involved with some of the TV stuff that Alabama State does, as well as the radio side of things. So I figured he covers Auburn, Alabama during the week. He covers, all Alabama State athletics, as part of that network. I think he's a perfect guest to get. So the middle segment of today's show will be us chatting with him, and I look forward to doing that. Before we get to that point, I just kind of want to put a few things out there in regards to expectations for things happening this Saturday, 11 o'clock kick. And so we've seen Auburn, kind of not just Auburn. I mean, teams in general. I mean, it's tough to get up and get going and play a game at 11 o'clock. Going to be curious to see what the crowd looks like with the 11 o'clock kick with Alabama State. That's something to look at. Is Bo Nix going to continue to look as impressive as he did last week? I think that's a big question that you have to consider, something that you have to think about. And, just how does Auburn deal with, okay, you are now in the season, you're now in the thick of it. And what did they look at from this past Saturday to take that step forward? So the first guy I'm looking at is Bo Nix. Can he keep that going? The next guy is Shedrick Jackson. Can he continue to kind of be Bo Nix's main target on the outside? Or are we going to see Demetrius Robertson kind of over the course of the season as he gets more and more acclimated with, the game speed of things and Auburn's playbook and all of that? Are we going to see him slowly take over? Or is Johnson and the Nix to Johnson connection, is it, as lethal as it possibly could be? Does that grow over time? And then, of course, I mean, there's so many similar talking points going into this Auburn-Alabama State game that were similar to last week, right? I mean, a team that Auburn should have no trouble putting points up on the board against. And then also just the fact of okay, what does the snap count look like against Alabama State? Is it similar to Akron? Well, the starters, assuming they're able to score at will, which I think they will be against Alabama State, will the starters play a half, and then will they play the first drive of the second half, and then they start kind of pull guys? Or maybe since, Harsin saw enough of that, do they kind of, put other guys in, give other guys more of a chance to play early on? Personally, I would like to see more Jarquez Hunter. He's a guy that I would like to see more of this week that we didn't get to see a whole lot of last week. I mean, the amount of Jarquez Hunter snaps that we saw, it just left me wanting more and more and more. It's like the first few that you saw and really that first run that he had. I mean, there was a lot to like about as he slowly worked his way to the outside. But it's like, man, that guy does a lot of things you really, really like. And I'm like, I want to see more of that. And we just didn't see a whole lot of it. So I would love to see more of that. Does the alignment of the offensive line stay the same? In the official depth chart and the media guide that they released throughout the week, they still have oars at both of the guard positions. But last week, it looked like it was pretty solid, who was going to be there. Brandon Council at left guard, Keandre Jones at right guard. To my knowledge, there wasn't a whole lot of switching between, the quote unquote starters, despite them there being an or next to their name. So is that something that changes? I don't expect it to. I think the offensive line was one of the brighter spots of what we saw this past Saturday, but still something to look at. Other things to look at is the return, or I guess we're going to see more of Ladarius Tennyson. We did not see him last week. And then Jalen Simpson missed time as he had to step away a little bit with an injury. And reports coming out specifically, I'm looking at this Auburn undercover story by Mark Murphy, report saying Harsin is expecting defensive backs Tennyson and Simpson to play this week. So that's something that I think Auburn fans can look at and be excited about. And C-Dub talked about it yesterday on the War Report Wednesday, as C-Dub and Mike G of the War Report joined us. But he brought up, tackling in space, tackling in the open field. I think Alabama State's going to give Auburn more opportunities to get game reps with tackling in space just by nature of their offense. And they are a little bit better than the Akron Zips, especially offensively. And Alabama State's got a pretty good running back too. So, that's not a guy that you're just going to be able to arm tackle. No disrespect to Akron, but Alabama State is a little bit better. Still, the jump from Alabama State to Penn State is tremendous. I mean, it's not even comparable. So I'm just trying to look and see what kind of information can we get from this Saturday to where we can take that into the following week. Because, man, next week is going to be fun. Next week is going to be a blast, and I can't wait for it. So we'll see what happens there. But coming up in just a moment, a conversation with Darrell Dapprich. And then I want to talk about some guys that could step up with Alan Flanagan missing some time for Auburn basketball moving forward. But first things first, today's show brought to you by our friends at Frisky Whiskey. If you're in the Auburn, Opelika County area, you hop on I-85, head into Georgia. It's that first exit. It's on the right. You'll see Frisky Whiskey billboards all over the place. And when you step in there, you will see all kinds of selection, 10,000 square feet of selection. So, look, there's going to be a lot of tailgating this weekend. Frisky Whiskey is the place to get all of your essentials, whether it's beer or wine, any kind of spirits that you can imagine, whiskey, vodka, tequila. Frisky Whiskey has it all at a ridiculously low price point. It's ridiculous. Some of that has to do with Georgia's tax laws compared to Alabama's tax laws. And then some of it because they've just been in business for so long and they've got all the relationships with all the folks that you want. So be sure to check out our friends at Frisky Whiskey. Also, today's show brought to you by our friends at rockauto.com. With all the different makes and models out there now, it's impossible for these, traditional chain storefronts to hold all the parts that you may need for your car, truck, or SUV. Look, we just recently bought a pretty old kind of beat up car just to kind of have, as a backup vehicle for our family. And there's a few things. I am not a handy person, but I've been doing some research on other YouTube videos and reading about, how to repair these things. I'm going to get my parts from rockauto.com. I just got to make sure I can, I get the right thing. So I'm going to rockauto.com probably sometime next week to seal the deal and order some of that stuff. And I'm going to do that. And when I do that at rockauto.com in the How Did You Hear About Us box, you do this like me, type in Locked On Auburn in the How Did You Hear About Us box so they know that we sent you. Amazing selection, reliably low prices, and all the parts your car will ever need. That is at rockauto.com. All right, joining us now on Locked On Auburn, Darrell Dapprich. My friend, he is a host at the Max Roundtable up in Montgomery, as well as a very big member of the Hornets Sports Network. Darrell, how you doing, brother?
I'm doing great, man. It's great to be on with you. Roles reversed a little bit.
Yeah. Normally I hop on with you and Doug on Wednesdays, but I appreciate you hanging out with me here on Locked On Auburn on this kind of crossover Thursday that we're doing. So really, really appreciate it. First off, I know you're an Auburn guy as well as an Alabama State guy. Kind of give me your thoughts on what you saw from Auburn this past week. I was very impressed with them.
I was too. I was looking more along the lines of just focusing on Auburn execution, not really worried too much about the opponent. And then I went back, and I didn't want to get caught up in kind of the hoopla and the hype of how efficient and how good they looked, because to me they looked really, really good. So I went back 2 years ago and watched some highlights when Auburn played Tulane and Kent State, when Bo Nix was a freshman. Mm-hmm. And I was trying to make a comparison. And even in those games, Bo Nix didn't look as sharp. He overthrew some receivers. There was a definite lack of a route tree. Auburn's receivers were not getting separation like they were last Saturday.
Sure.
Of course, they didn't have Tank Bigsby 2 years ago either. And I think that's the key, is that, they've got such a potent running game that I think we're going to see Nix be more efficient and going to see more receivers running free in the secondary.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree with everything you said there. Absolutely. So tell us about this Alabama State team. What do we need to know going into this matchup?
Well, they're a team, Zach, that really benefited from playing a spring season last year. As you know, some of the FCS schools, the Big Sky Conference, the SWAC, some others, they didn't play in the fall of 2020, but they came back and they played a limited spring season.
Yeah.
And Alabama State got a chance to play 6 games last year. They actually played for the Western Division title, and they lost their rivalry game against Alabama A&M, which is the Magic City Classic.
Sure.
But they were that close to going to the SWAC championship game. But they benefited immensely from being able to get a spring season in. They broke in a freshman quarterback, Ryan Nettles from Evergreen, who played really well last year. He's the SWAC newcomer of the year. And they have a very young offensive line. They start 4 freshmen and a sophomore. So these guys got experience last year in the spring that they normally wouldn't have had. They'd have been jumping into the fire in the fall right now. So the spring season really helped them being able to play 6 games.
Sure. Have you heard, just talking with folks and kind of following this team closely, Daryl, any kind of fatigue of, okay, you had not a full season, but a pretty, substantial chain of games there, 6 games, like you said, in the spring. And then you just have, a very short offseason before you get going in the fall. Is that there been any talk about that?
There has been, and that was a big concern. That's a great point. I mean, because you know how it is, fall to fall, sometimes fatigue sets in. And
sure,
they had no spring camp virtually. I mean, they went right from the spring playing a season to a fall camp. They did play a lot of kids in the spring. I noticed they really went 3 deep, even in games that were fairly close. And I think they did that by design because they knew, they had an 11, 12 game schedule coming up this year. So they, last Saturday night against Miles College, who was a very scrappy opponent, they actually played a lot of players. They you could tell they used their 2 deep, but that was a big concern.
Yeah.
But so far so good. They haven't seen anything from a fatigue standpoint.
Sure. As far as the transfer portal at that level of college football, Daryl, I mean, are you seeing guys kind of move up to maybe some more bigger name programs, and then maybe some guys that are transferring to Alabama State from other programs? Did you see that over the offseason?
I did. In fact, one of Alabama State's starting cornerbacks, Jaquez Payton, was a transfer from Jacksonville State.
Okay.
And he played really, really well Saturday night. In fact, they have an all-SWAC safety named Ershaw Davis, who's really a good player, but Payton kind of stole the show. I mean, he had a pick 6 that got called back because of being offsides. He was in on a new number of plays with breakups. So he was probably the most impressive secondary player on the field for Alabama State. And then their kicker, Cosmin Dianku, he actually was a transfer from Troy. He was there last year. He almost made a 54-yarder to win it in regulation. He didn't. He had the distance. He just missed it left. So there hasn't been a lot of. There's a couple of guys from UAB that have made the 2 deep right now. But I would just say, so far, Peyton has been the one that stood out to me as far as immediate help in the transfer portal.
Sure. So you mentioned a young offensive line, Daryl, that started over the spring. How did they look in regards to, what you would have expected this past Saturday?
They looked pretty good in the first half. They opened up a lot of running lanes for the all-SWAC running back Ezra Gray, but as the game wore on, they looked like they wore down a little bit. There wasn't as many holes there. Both running backs that Alabama State used had a hard time finding running lanes.
Sure.
And I think it was more of a case of Miles College, who wasn't that big, but was very quick. They were shooting gaps, they were stunning, that kind of thing. So from a running standpoint, Alabama State was not happy at all with the way they ran the football in the second half.
Do you think that will be how they choose to attack this Auburn defense, or do you think they'll have to do it through the air?
I think they're going to have to do it through the air. Their quarterback, Ryan Nettles, he had a pretty good game, especially in the second half. But I think they're going to have to throw the ball, and they're going to have to get him out of the pocket. He got sacked 3 or 4 times Saturday. We saw what Auburn's defensive front did to Akron's quarterback. So Nettles is going to have to be really effective for them, and they're going to have to get him out of the pocket, out of containment, move around a little bit, or he'll be a sitting duck.
Is he a pretty mobile quarterback, Daryl?
He is. Now, he stays in the pocket. They don't do a lot of design rollouts for him. Okay. He stays in the pocket. He's more of a pocket passer, but when he senses pressure, he gets out pretty quick, and he's able to get some yards downfield with his feet. But it's not by design. It's more by necessity. with
Okay.
him.
As far as pass catchers, who does Auburn need to shut down, make sure that they kind of put a blanket around a certain receiver or a tight end? Is there a first read that he's going to go to early and often?
He goes to Jeremiah Hickson, number one, a lot. He's his favorite target. He's the receiver he goes to when he needs a big first down, and he runs a lot of slant patterns. He got free for about 4 or 5 slant patterns. It was real effective with yards after the catch. In fact, the game-tying drive in overtime was a big third down. He ran a slant, picked up 15 yards, and he just goes to him a lot. They've got a tight end who I think is really special. He's a redshirt sophomore. He's 6'4", 231. Yeah. His name is Terrence Ellis. Zach, he was open 3 or 4 times Saturday. One time in overtime that would have tied the game, Nettles just overshot him. He was wide open. Now, he was a matchup problem for Miles linebackers. Mm-hmm. I don't suspect he'll be a matchup problem for Auburn's linebackers, but he's got the body of a tight end and runs like a receiver.
Okay. Yeah, no, I think that's going to be something interesting to keep an eye on. I mean, and Auburn has more athletic linebackers for sure, but I would like to see a guy like Owen Papo or Zacoby McClain kind of be asked to cover a more athletic pass catcher like that going into Penn State. I think that would make a lot of sense.
Well, they're going to get an opportunity if Derek Mason decides that they want to see that look. Ellis is the guy to try it out, the litmus test, because again, he was open a lot. He goes downfield. He's that kind of tight end that you'll see run seam patterns.
Right.
They have another tight end that runs a lot of patterns in the flat, not Ellis. Ellis uses his speed to kind of go up the seam, up the hash marks. And so if Auburn wants to use Papo or McClain to do that, this would be the opportunity to kind of get some work in along those lines.
How do you think Auburn's going to handle, I guess the snap count of a lot of these players, Daryl? I mean, you cover this team. Do you think it's going to be similar to how they use guys against Akron, or do you think it's going to be a little bit more cautious, a little more conservative against Alabama State just because Penn State's a week away?
I think the one thing I'll notice is I would think that anybody that got banged up in week one, a guy like Javarius Johnson or, Colby Wooten, someone like that, I would imagine that they probably just for precautionary might get held out. You might see a guy like Tennyson and Tavares Dawson that didn't get a chance to play, get reps. Alabama's linebackers Alabama State's linebackers in secondary, in my opinion, having seen Akron and cover ASU, their secondary and linebackers are better than Akron's. Their defense might be better than Akron's. I mean, their defensive line has 2 guys that are big. One 6'1", 363. He's a senior. He's an all-SWAC guy. Christian Clark has been playing forever on that defensive line. Alabama's defense is going to be, in my opinion, a little saltier than Akron's. So as far as playing the amount of players, I still think Auburn will go 3-4 deep in the ball game, but I think that Alabama State's defense is a little bit better. We'll offer up, I think, more resistance than Akron did.
Sure, I agree with you. I mean, looking at Akron was a really bad football team, and a lot of folks will be, very quick to tell you when an Auburn fan is celebrating how good Auburn looked on Saturday. They're like, well, it's Akron. It's like, well, yeah, we know that. And they're going to do the same thing with Alabama State. But I agree with that. I think Alabama State's a much better football team.
Their defensive line is where it starts, and they're good. I mean, they got another kid named Andrew Ogletree, who was all SWAC. They got good active linebackers with good size, 6'4", 245, 6'1", 230, 2 guys that made a lot of tackles. So I think from that standpoint, they'll see a little bit more resistance. Secondary's good. It's just going to be about depth. I mean, I think, and listen, from an offensive line standpoint, I think Auburn's offensive line will have a little bit more of a test than they did against Akron with the defensive line of Alabama State, which will be a good thing for Auburn getting ready to go to Penn State.
Sure. Daryl, you do a lot of great stuff. You, Doug, and Charlie put together a great show from Montgomery every single day. How can folks tune into all the stuff that you're doing?
Well, you can hear us from 11 to 2, Monday through Fridays on ESPN The Ticket 107.5. The website's espntheticket.com. You can check there, just click live and then obviously on our website, if you miss a show, we do have a podcast type format where you can go back and listen to all 3 hours.
Daryl, thank you so much for your time, man. Really, really appreciate it.
Appreciate you, Zach. Have a good day, man.
Today's show brought to you by Sweatblock. Sweatblock, really cool product. Doctor created, doctor recommended. It works for up to 7 days per use. And if sweating is something that you deal with, or especially this time of year, I think a lot of us deal with it. It's a wipe that you apply to your underarms once a week. It lasts for 7 days, and you don't have to worry about sweating in all those meetings. Or if you just go outside to go into your car and go because you got to go call on a client or something like that. I mean, this time of year, if you're in the South, and a lot of you guys listening are in the South, you don't have to be outside for very long to start sweating. So Sweatblock is sensitive to that. They get that. And you can go get some Sweatblock products today. Sweatblock.com. Use promo code LOCKEDON to get 20% off. That is at sweatblock.com. Also, today's show brought to you by betonline.ag, the best place to place all of your sports bets. All you have to do is go to betonline.ag. When you make that first deposit, use promo code LOCKEDON, LOCKEDON, to get a 100% welcome bonus on your first deposit. BetOnline, your online sportsbook experts. So I want to continue the conversation that we had on the War Report Wednesday a little bit yesterday, but I just kind of want to talk about some of the guys that we could look at for the Auburn Tigers over the next few weeks in regards to who can step up and kind of fill that void in regards to Alan Flanagan missing like around 12 weeks or so is what it looks like. What is that going to look like as far as who could possibly step up and fill that void? So Devin Cambridge is a guy that comes to mind. I think he's got a lot of ability. And I mean, there was just a lot of traffic and a lot of bodies that were in that 2/3 position. And I think Devin Cambridge could be a guy that really benefits from more minutes. I think one, he needs it from an experience standpoint. And two, I think just seeing him on the court more with other guys could be really beneficial. So Devin Cambridge is a guy. Chris Moore is a dude that has been really brought up a lot in these conversations about who's going to get more minutes with Alan Flanagan out. So Chris Moore, I mean, I'm reading this from Lance's post on auburnwire.com, but it sounds like he's had a terrific offseason according to the coaching staff. Sounds like he's slimmed down a bit and he's getting more of an outside shot. So we saw Chris Moore really, I think we saw what he could possibly be, his upside in that Missouri game last year. And then that's really all that we saw from him. So can we get that on a more consistent basis? He's got the size, he's got the ability, the athletic ability. Can he put it all together? Maybe he could. Maybe he could. So Chris Moore could be a big winner here as far as getting more playing time. Zep Jasper, friend of the program. We're going to be a little biased towards Zep Jasper, but as far as guard depth, he talked about being a combo guard when he appeared on this show just a few weeks ago. And I think he could see maybe more time at shooting guard. He talked about being a point guard and a shooting guard, but maybe he could spend more time at the 2 guard with Alan Flanagan being out. I think Zep Jasper is definitely a guy to watch. And then the last guy, Jalen Williams. I think you can make the argument that Jalen Williams could probably play 3 out of the 5 spots, but the 4 and the 5 positions are really locked up now with Kessler and Jabari. So it's like, okay, where does Jalen fit into all of this? Jalen Williams, some people see him as a potential NBA guy. Justin Ferguson is very high on Jalen Williams as a player, as well as several other folks on the Auburn beat. So could Jalen Williams slide into that 3 spot? That's something to be excited about. It's something to think about. And it just really kind of shows how deep this Auburn basketball team is. So still, Alan Flanagan should be able to come back by the time conference play starts. The big question is, when you deal with an Achilles, it takes a long time. Like, he may be cleared to play, but is he going to be the same player? I don't know. I don't know the answer to that. But thoughts and prayers to Alan Flanagan. I know he's hurting emotionally right now because, he was so looking forward to the season. He was finally getting, put on some NBA mock drafts and was really getting the attention of the NBA. So hopefully he figures it all out. Hopefully he pulls it all together. But man, that's a tough one. That's a tough one for sure. Guys, thank you so much for watching or listening. However you're consuming this podcast, it means a ton. It means an absolute ton. The numbers over the past month have been incredible. And obviously with the season starting, they just continue to go up. So thank you so much for your support. It means the world. You can follow me on Twitter at Z Blackerby. You can read all of my written work at auburnwire.com. The show is on Twitter at Locked On Auburn and on Instagram at Auburn Podcast. And once again, you can check out every episode on YouTube. We will see you tomorrow for a Ferg Friday. Reach out if you have any questions for Justin Ferguson of the Auburn Observer. We'll see you tomorrow right here on Locked On Auburn.